You're listening to Parasearch UK Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. You're listening to Seventh Sanctum with Kerry Ann, only on Parasearch UK Radio.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Seventh Sanctum. Now, I know you're waiting to hear the dulcet tones of the lovely Kerry Ann, but I'm really sorry to inform you that she's having a holiday. I know, I've told the presenters they're not allowed to have holidays, but she's having a little break. So you are with me, I'm Kerry Greenaway, and tonight I am joined by the absolutely lovely Paul Adams. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening, Kerry. How are you?
I'm absolutely fine, thank you. Now, Paul Adams is, if you remember rightly, when Kerry Ann and I went to London, we visited the SPR and we went to a talk about a new book called The Enigma of Rosalie, which was written by Paul himself. And he's agreed to come on and talk to us all about that and about all the other things that he does as well, because he's written so many books, it's absolutely untrue. So, Paul, where did you start? I mean, the subjects that you cover are absolutely fascinating. So where did you start when you started writing?
Well, I mean, how did I start in the getting interested in the paranormal and things like that?
Yeah, what first?
Well, a lot of people, when they get involved in this subject, it's normally through having a personal experience or something happens to them that they can't explain, and they start to sort of look into it and become sort of interested in paranormal and psychical matters. Myself, it sounds very corny, but it wasn't the way with me. I actually got into sort of things by reading ghost stories for children, when I was young. There was a very nice series of books edited by Mary Danby, which people of my vintage will remember. And so really it was reading ghost stories and then watching Hammer horror films with my father about the sort of tender age of 7. And from there, I started to get to read books of sort of non-fiction books by Dan Farson. There were some books, Hamlin Book of Ghosts and the Beaver Book of Horror. They were ones from the sort of mid-70s that sort of where he looked at it, for young teenage readers. And then I went on holiday in 1977 down to the West Country, and we went to Sanford Orcus Manor House, which was at that time had the sort of title of supposedly the most haunted house in England. And my parents and we were shown round by the tenants then, Colonel Claridge and his wife. And Claridge regaled us with all these stories of these sort of ghostly figures and apparitions that he and his wife had said they'd seen and experienced over the years that they'd been there. And I sort of became that sort of thing that really sort of hooked me into it, And while I was there, Claridge showed us a photograph, and I've actually got a copy of it here. It was one of these sort of pictures where you get a family shot of his daughter and a dog on the lawn, and in the background is this odd figure, this white shape. Which he said was one of the Noyle family who used to live in Sanford Orcus Manor, several generations back, and the figure obviously hadn't been there when the photograph was taken. So they were the things that really got me interested in the paranormal, and it sort of grew from there really.
Oh, absolutely brilliant! I think we all have that trigger point, don't we, that catches our imagination as
definitely.
in our younger years, and then we go on. I think I read a Penguin book of hauntings when I was young, and that was sort of one of the things that caught my interest. So I understand what you mean.
Yeah, the 70s. There were some nice books around in the 70s, which I think people look back on. Certainly at my age, look back on very fondly. It was this sort of time when everything was really exciting, and you believed it all. You know what I mean? You were very uncritical, so you believed it all, and you sort of soaked it all in. And it was they were some good times.
Yeah, they were very good times. And one of the stories in the book that I read that caught my imagination was Borley Rectory, which you have written a book on. You've written a book called The Borley Rectory Companion with your friend Eddie, isn't it?
Eddie Brazil, that's right, yes.
Eddie Brazil, thank you.
And Peter Underwood, the well-known writer and author on paranormal subjects. Yes, Borley Rectory was the next step up, really. I think from there was an audio drama that was produced about 1979. About the Borley hauntings, where they dramatised, the story, and that was a real sort of watershed moment for me as well. And obviously, Borley is one of the most famous haunted houses, certainly in this country and probably in the world as well. The Borley always fascinated me, and we started the Borley book in 2006 as a project to try, and there have been several books written about Borley over the year. I think there was about 7 or 8 books already written, including 2 important ones written by Harry Price in the 1940s, and we wanted to try and put together an encyclopedia of the case, if you will, and sort of bring it all together, so that it catered for people who were new to the case, who didn't know anything about it. They could sort of learn from scratch, about this important case. And also there was lots of juicy stuff in there as well for the seasoned Borley enthusiasts, to really sort of get their teeth into,
Yeah.
So. And it started as a project between Eddie and myself, and we had the idea of him asking Peter Underwood to do a foreword to it, or an introduction, because Eddie had corresponded with Peter back in the early 70s. And we asked Peter to get involved, just to whether he would be prepared to do an introduction. And he was so generous with offers of, help and material that we sort of had we were quite bold. We asked him whether he would come along as a co-author, and he accepted. And then the project went to a completely different level, because we had the benefit of his 60 years, experience of researching the Borley case. I mean, Peter first went to the site of Borley Rectory in 1947, when the ruins, when you could still see the open cellars in the ground, when the brick walls were still there.
Yeah.
And he virtually interviewed many people associated with the case over the years, so we had access to all that material, and that made the book very special,
Yeah,
so,
it does make it very special. It's a very interesting book, and it's written, like you say, in a very easy format for somebody that's never really looked at that case before.
That's right, yeah. I mean, the idea was that the first part of it, if you knew nothing about Borley Rectory, only just knew the name, then you could read it and get up to speed with the case. And then there was the sort of the dictionary section, where you had all the people, places, phenomena, and events and things all connected with the Borley case. And we. We were not certainly biased, but Peter, Eddie, and I, believed that Borley was a genuine haunted house. It probably wasn't the most haunted house, and probably a lot of the things that were said to have gone on there probably have been, probably didn't happen. But nevertheless, we thought that we could present all this material and then let the reader make his or her mind up, as to how you interpret all this information.
So have you obviously you went to Borley?
Mm-hmm.
And what was your impressions when you went to Borley yourself? When did you go?
Well, Well, Eddie Brazil first went to Borley in about 1972 when he was about 16 years old. It took me a long time to get to Borley. I think I first went to Borley in about 2001. So, and it's one of those little blink and you miss it type sort of villages. It's a few scattered houses, a church opposite, and then opposite the site where the rectory was. I mean, it's a private land now, private garden. Yes, I think once you get there and if you know about the case and you've read about it, and suddenly all these pieces sort of slot together, and you get a sense of the immense sort of history of it. It's psychical, it's paranormal history, and so it's a very special place.
Yeah,
sure.
I have visited Borley,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like you say, it's a tiny little village, isn't it?
That's right. Yes. Oh, yes.
I didn't quite know what I was expecting when I arrived there, but it is. It's a really sleepy, tiny little village, and it's so quiet.
Oh yeah. I mean, when the rectory stood there, the rectory was there from. Well, there was at least two former buildings on the rectory site before the Borley rectory was built, and yes, you had the house itself, the church. There was a tithe barn opposite the church, a couple of houses, and a farm, and that was it basically. So it's a very small place. Now, obviously, the rectory's gone, and there have been more houses or bungalows built in its grounds because it occupied a large, section of land. Mm-hmm. But it's still, even though with the advent of, it's so much easier to travel, and get into the countryside these days than it was then. I mean, then in the 1920s and 30s when Price was going there, it really was remote. You had to get the train to Long Melford and then walk basically quite some miles to get to it. So it was very remote, and the ideal location for a haunted house, definitely.
Excellent. Now, I can't move on from Borley without mentioning Ashley Thorpe's new film that's going to be out soon.
Yes, that's looking forward to that. It's going to be good.
We saw a little preview, didn't we, at that meeting we went to?
Yeah, labour of love, but he's fantastic. It's an animated, it's a feature about the Borley film, done with the green screen, where the actors play in front of a green screen, and then Ashley is an amazing animator, and he's done an amazing job in bringing the story to life, and trying to. I mean, I was amazed at how accurate he was getting. I mean, I gave him some help with photographs and material that he's used as manipulated as background plates and things like that. He's a great attention to detail, and the actors, do look like the people that they're portraying, and it looks fantastic. Really looking forward to that.
And we were very lucky because we got to see a little sneaky peek of
That's
the
right.
film.
Yeah.
We have actually shared the trailer that we saw in our Parasearch UK Radio Facebook page, and I'm still trying to pin Ashley down for an interview about it, so we shall see. But the reason I wanted to mention that is because on the front of your new book, The Enigma of Rosalie, Ashley Thorpe is the gentleman that actually did the drawing, isn't it?
He did a beautiful painting of Rosalie, of the spirit child Rosalie. Yes, I always envisaged something like that for the cover of the book, and I knew that Ashley was an animator and he'd been working on the Borley film, and then I saw some paintings that he'd done of film characters. He did portraits on Facebook that he put them on his page, and they were amazing. There was a bit one of Christopher Lee, and he did one of Pinhead from the Hellraiser series, and he did one of Peter Cushing's Grimsdyke in Tales from the Crypt, and they were fantastic. And his style of painting, I thought that's the person that I need to bring Rosalie to the cover of the book. So yeah, I commissioned Ashley to do the painting, and he said, I know a subject that I can use, and he went away and then sent the picture through, and I was amazed. It's a beautiful, beautiful painting, and lots of people have commented on that, how wonderful the picture is. So yeah, amazing. He did an amazing job on that.
He did a really good job. It's a beautiful, like you say, it's beautiful. Thoroughly like that style he's got, very much so. Now,
I didn't want it spooky. I didn't want it spooky or scary. I just wanted it. It's just there's an amazing look in that in the figure's eyes in that. So yeah, it's a beautiful picture.
Yeah, he's done a great job. Now, Harry Price, we've mentioned a couple of times, and you're somewhat of a little expert on Harry, aren't you?
Well, I suppose he's one of these figures that that you find. I've found him quite inspiring. I've found him infuriating, but yeah, he's one of these larger than life characters, which I think all disciplines need. And yeah, I've sort of read a lot about Price and. I think there'll always be a place for Harry in whatever I sort of get up to,
Well, yeah. I mean, as I say, I've only just sort of like started learning about the physical mediumship side of things. Kerry Ann, bless her, has been trying for years to bash it into me. And I've been like, no, I'm not interested. But to be fair, when I first read, the first chapter really depicts Harry's journey in regards to the SPR and his, overall an overview of how he worked and what he worked. Could you explain to our audience a little bit about Harry Price and his journey through it all? Because he was quite sceptical, yet tried to prove as well. He was very, very double. He had that sort of double side to him, didn't he?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, Price was was born in London in 1881, and he stepped up and came onto the scene, onto the sort of psychical research scene, just after the end of the First World War. Before the First World War, he had sort of amused himself by becoming interested in conjuring and fairground sideshows and things like that, and magic and legerdemain, and he did sit with various mediums before the First World War, and he became interested in the subject. Now, that period, that sort of period between when Price was active, the interwar period, the 20s and 30s, and then through until sort of just after the Second World War. That scene was very different from today, where investigators are more interested in, spontaneous phenomena, haunted houses, poltergeist type phenomena, and things like that. Then Price and his contemporaries were very much involved with spiritualism and investigating the claims of spiritualists and mediums, and trying to test and examine various mediums and prove, whether or not their claims to be able to, contact the dead and in the most advanced form materialise the dead in solid form could be substantiated. So Price and members of the Society for Psychical Research were always, investigating these mediums, and where Price was concerned, he was a member of the SPR, joined in 1920, but he was a very, very much an independent character, wanted to be sort of a leader rather than follow other people. So in the mid-20s, he set up his own organisation, which he called the National Laboratory of Psychical Research, and he established that in the building that we went to launch the Rosalie book last month at 16 Queensbury Place in South Kensington, which is now the home of the College of Psychic Studies. But in Price's day, it was the London Spiritualist Alliance, and Price rented the top floor of that building, and sort of had a weird situation where a very critical and sceptical researcher, very sceptical about the claims of spiritualism, was then ended up being a tenant of a spiritualist organisation for about 5 years there. But he established a laboratory there on the top floor of 16 Queensbury Place. He had a seance room there, very, very advanced seance room, probably the most technically advanced seance room in Europe at that time. It had full blackout conditions for equipment for photography, temperature monitoring, A very sophisticated setup, and there he would bring mediums in and examine them and test them and try and see if their claims could be substantiated. I mean, some of the famous people that he investigated, Rudi Schneider, who was an Austrian medium. He brought him over from the continent and investigated him. And of course, he had a very controversial investigation of Mrs. Duncan, Helen Duncan, who is now sort of more familiar to people as the last witch in England. I mean, she was famously put on trial in 1944 under the now repealed sort of Witchcraft Act and sentenced to 9 months imprisonment for fraudulent practices. Price investigated her. So yeah, he was this sort of trailblazing man who, at the same time, was very, very media savvy and courted the press, knew how to handle the newspapers and the radio broadcasts, and this was the sort of thing that he was between a rock and a hard place for much of his sort of psychical career. He was looked on with a lot of scepticism and disdain by the spiritualists who felt he was too critical. Excuse me. And also at the same time, colleagues within the sort of the psychical research community felt that all his publicity, he was not serious enough and enjoyed the limelight a bit too much. So he was a controversial character.
It makes him makes him an incredibly interesting case study because of who he is. I mean, as I say, I'm in the process of reading this book at the moment, and it opened my eyes quite a bit to the approaches he took. And although, like you say, he approached it incredibly focused, is really where I sort of have come to the decision of he comes across as very arrogant. He comes across as incredibly focused on what he was doing. I can imagine it was almost a really incredibly intense experience working with Harry Price.
Beg pardon, sorry, I didn't catch that last bit.
I said I think it would be a very intense experience working with Harry Price.
Oh yes, definitely, yes. He had. I mean, he courted many people, and there's some. He had many people were higher, titled people were involved in his work. So, yes, he was. He could be a difficult man to get on with, but I think a very sincere man. As well as a bit of a character,
That's right. How did a question has come up in the chat room from Richard Clements. How did Harry Price finance his research?
Well, Price, a lot of people think that he was this sort of millionaire type character who had all this sort of time and money to devote to it. He was he never actually gave up the day job. He actually worked for many years for a paper manufacturer called Edward Saunders and Son. So he had a sort of a managerial position there. So I think he had to sort of do a day or a couple of days work a week there. So he had an income coming in from that, which he never gave that up. He worked for that company all of his life. Excuse me. But he also had some money coming in from his wife, Constance Price, who had a sort of a little trust fund of money, and so he was able to sort of use some of that as well. So, and also he had income coming in from his various. The books. I mean, he wrote about a dozen or so books during his lifetime, and they were some of them sold very well, and also he had royalties from sort of book. He wrote a lot of newspaper and magazine articles, and did radio. He was quite a pioneer he did the first. Live radio broadcast from a haunted house, which was in Meopham in Kent in 1936. And this is years before programs like sort of Most Haunted Live made it sort of fashionable. Harry was there, right from the start. So he knew that was an important way of getting his sort of message across. So he had his money coming in from various sources.
Yeah. So when Harry tackled a situation of supposed hauntings, he had a very basic or a very set kit, didn't he? He used to go with a briefcase, a suitcase. It was.
That's right. Yeah, he had what he called the Ghost Hunters kit, which was a lot of equipment which he brought along. I mean, it's all sort of practical stuff. I mean, he had there were tape measures and things for making measurements of rooms and buildings and things like that. Tapes and things for sealing windows and doors and controlling areas, just the same way that people do today. Cameras. I mean, he was quite a good photographer, so he understood photography and cameras. So he had quite a sophisticated setup of camera equipment that he would bring along. There's also a couple of nice things in this case. There was a flask of brandy in there in case anybody sort of fainted, during a ghost investigation, and some soft felt overshoes for creeping about in the dark, when you didn't want people to, so you could sort of creep about unobserved, But,
You've now got visions of him a little drunk, creeping around haunted places with his soft shoes on.
With his camera equipment. Yeah.
With his camera. It's conjuring up a picture, I tell you.
I've actually seen some of this. There is that he made a newsreel film in 1934, a couple of years before the Rosalie case, which he scripted and was on the Movietone News. And now that's quite now readily available on YouTube, so people can see that. And you can see he gives a little talk on his work on psychical research. But at one point he goes into one part of his laboratory, and you can see a lot of the equipment that he talks about on the around him. The cameras are all there and all sort of stuff, the X-ray machine, equipment that he tried to X-ray Mrs. Duncan with, and that sort of stuff, So it's all recorded, and some of it still survives. I think the briefcase and some of the bits and pieces of the ghost hunting kit still is around in the archives at the University of London in the Senate House, so you can make an appointment and go and see it if you want to.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that's actually quite fascinating about Harry Price is because of his knowledge in these areas with cameras and stuff like this. Things are really well documented, and he was a prolific writer. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, he was a very good writer. He was an entertaining writer. Some of his little quips and things in his books are quite amusing. Yes, he was a good writer. He started with a sort of a general book. One of his first one, there was Leaves from a Psychic's Case book and Confessions of a Ghost Hunter, which he wrote in the 30s. And then he wrote probably one of his best books is The 50 Years of Psychical Research, which was like a history of the previous 5 decades of organised paranormal inquiry. I think that's a very good book. It still stands up today. It's readable and informative, and that's actually the book in which he first publicised the Rosalie case. Then there are these two Borley Rectory books, the Most Haunted House in England, which came out in 1940, and The End of Borley Rectory, which was 1946. They're very readable books. And then he wrote during the Second World War, he wrote a big book about poltergeist phenomena, poltergeist over England. So he was a good writer. An engaging writer, and he knew his stuff. He knew his history, and he knew his history of psychical research for sure.
Brilliant. Well, we need to take a short break, believe it or not. We're halfway through already. So let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to look at the case of Rosalie. I keep saying Rosalie, don't I? It's Rosalie. And we're going to look at the case of that when we come back, so stay tuned.
You're listening to Parasearch UK Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio.
Join Kerry Greenaway and Jay Lynch for the Parasearch UK radio show as they share their paranormal news, views and reviews from the UK and the USA, with the help of guests from both sides of the pond. Will they agree or agree to disagree? Find out every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, right here on Paramania Radio.
Welcome back. I'm Kerry Greenaway. You're listening to Seventh Sanctum, and tonight I'm being joined by the amazing Paul Adams. And before we broke for the break, we started talking a little bit about the case of Rosalie. Now, this is a very interesting case in the Harry Price world, I suppose you would call it.
Definitely, yeah. Yes, it was probably after Borley Rectory. It was probably one of his most sort of famous cases, and it has its origins in the Borley investigation. Price had a sort of an on and off relationship with Borley Rectory during the 30s. He went there in 1929, but in 1937 he decided the place was empty. He decided to rent it initially for 6 months, and then that was extended to a year, and he carried out a sort of an on-site investigation. He recruited people through an advertisement in the Times newspaper, vetted them with interviews, and then they went down and sort of held, visited the house and did sort of vigils there and reported back to him in London. And while he was doing that, he did a radio broadcast for the BBC. But they had a series going about sort of unusual things and haunted houses, and so he did a broadcast about it. He didn't mention Borley Rectory by name, but he to accompany the broadcast, there was a piece, an article that he wrote in the Listener magazine, and in it he used a particular phrase. He said, "I can guarantee you a ghost with this in this haunted house." And then about a month later, he received a telephone call from a lady who told him that she could guarantee him a ghost as well, and that's really where the story of the Rosalie begins.
And this case was complete non-disclosure, wasn't it? He wasn't allowed to disclose any of the details about. That's
right. Yes, he was given the opportunity. The lady caller, who he only ever refers to as Mrs. X in his published works, she said that she and her husband and her family held a private sort of home circle, a séance at their house every week. And at that séance, a little girl, a little 6-year-old girl who had been dead since 1921. We're talking 1937 when Price was contacted by Mrs. X. The little girl always materialised at every one of these meetings to be reunited with her mother, who was a French lady who had been widowed in the First World War. And they said that Price would have the opportunity to visit the circle and experience the materialisation of Rosalie himself. But yeah, there were house rules, complete anonymity. That he could write about his experience, but he mustn't name the people. He mustn't disclose where the séance took place, and there would be no follow-up investigation. It was a one-off opportunity to experience what a supposedly genuine materialisation.
So when he arrived at the house, because that's an opportunity you snap someone's hand off, don't you? Really?
Well, yes. I mean, funnily enough, he actually treated it with some levity initially, and thought that it was another. I mean, he had all sorts of weird people, calling him up and writing to him and saying that they were, I think he even investigated a haunted pram at one point. All this sort of stuff. he actually initially he treated it with some levity, but he was persuaded by Richard Lambert, who was the editor of The Listener, who happened to be have a lunch appointment with him the day that he got the telephone call. And he said, no, you must go along and at least, either prove or disprove this. And Lambert was hoping that he would sort of be able to come along with him as a sort of, as a sort of a assistant. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the case. But so eventually Price did take up the offer, and he wrote back to the lady and said yes, he would come along, and he went along on 15th of December 1937. He went along and to the house and took part in the séance.
And he took some serious measures when he entered the house, didn't he? He really did approach this with a scientific mind of, I will not be taken for a ride on this.
That's right. Yes. I mean, he said that he arrived there. He met the family. He met Rosalie's mother, who he calls Madame Z in his writings, and he spoke to them. He got some history of the background of the case, and then when they assembled in one of the rooms of the house to hold the séance, he was able to. That was another proviso, that he could control the séance in any way that he wanted to. So he arranged the sitters in the room where they sat in various chairs. He sealed the room, sealed the doors and the windows with tape. He searched the furniture. He searched the sitters. And he put starch powder on the floor around the door and the windows and around the fireplace to control it in a way that, if it would be apparent, if somebody tried to get in or out, they would leave footprints or marks in the starch powder, because obviously this was a blackout séance. There was no light, but yes, he controlled it. He was able to control control it as best he could. Yeah, definitely.
Now, the one thing that did catch my notice when I was reading your book was that they used to use fluorescent paint on mirrors, charge them up under an electric light bulb.
That's right. Yes, still do today in séances today. But yes, he was able to do that because during the course of the séance, Price said that the Rosalie appeared. That he, in the darkness, he felt the shape and form of a young child in the darkness, naked figure, and was able to examine it by the light of the luminous plaques. And he said that he saw the figure standing there. He tried to speak to her, but she didn't answer. But she only answered him on one occasion when final question. He asked, the question, Rosalie, do you love your mother? And the figure said yes, and then that was it. A very highly emotional atmosphere. All the ladies in the room were crying, and Price himself said he was affected by the emotional level in the room. Mm-hmm. and then. The plaques were put down, and after about 10-15 minutes, the lights were raised, and Price said that Rosalie had gone. The figure was not there. Only the people that were at the beginning of the séance were there, and none of his seals, none of his controls had been disturbed in any way, and he was absolutely dumbfounded by what he had experienced.
Okay, now he took the pulse of Rosalie, didn't he?
That's right. Yes, he listened to her heartbeat, took her pulse. Yes, yeah.
Which throws a question up in my mind regarding this: if you're dead and a ghost, would you have a pulse?
Well, yes. You see that? Yeah, that's the thing. Right from the start, this case was incredibly controversial because, Price initially kept it to himself. But then he spoke about it at a meeting of the Ghost Club about 18 months after it took place, and then later on he published an account in his book 50 Years Psychical Research towards the end of 1939, and it was instantly controversial because people couldn't believe that someone like Harry Price, who was a very astute man and was an expert conjurer and knew when he was being fooled. They couldn't believe that he would be taken in by a fake, by a fraudulent thing like that. And also at the same time, he drew fire from the spiritualists, because they couldn't believe that even after having such an incredible experience like that, he still wouldn't come out and accept, the reality of survival and spirit materialization. Because he said that if it had taken place in his laboratory, then he would have championed it. But even then, he said because it was not in a place that he could completely control and completely knew, then he couldn't say for 100% that it was real. Yeah. So it was very, very controversial. And obviously after Price died in 1948, his work was subjected to a very close scrutiny and criticism, and he was accused of having faked things. Certainly at Borley Rectory, his whole Borley case was looked on as being not as much as what he put it forward as. Rosalie was looked on in the same light, and it was considered to be a tall story, that he had made up to try and get some publicity for his work, So it was from the start, it was a very, 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 very controversial case.
Very, very much so. As I say, when I heard that, I did raise my eyes, but some people would argue that's all part of the physical manifestation of a spirit, like Ashley Nibbs in our chat room, who I believe you have spoken to before. You met him at the SPR, and you did a little piece from him in your book, Haunted Stevenage.
Oh, actually, yes, that's right. Yes. Good evening, Ashley.
There you go, a little shout out for you there, Ashley. Now, if you want to know more about this particular case, you're going to have to go and read the book. I've shared the link where you can go and buy this book in the chat room for Paul. And it's an incredibly interesting book, I have to say, and it's definitely opened my eyes up. Now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the other cases that Harry Price did, because he's done a couple that were really, really controversial. He never shied away from controversy, did he?
No, for sure. Do you mean some of his more publicity sort of orientated things? I mean, he did the famous Talking Mongoose adventure on the Isle of Man, which was one of his. That was about a year before Rosalie took place. Mm-hmm. This is a very interesting case. It sounds like a complete farce. The idea of a mongoose living on an island that could sort of talk and sing hymns and travel around the Isle of Man on a bus. But Price took it on, and it's there's more to it than what it seems. And was Geff the talking mongoose? Was it a hoax? Was it a poltergeist, as some people have suggested? Was it also a more controversial manifestation of abuse, of child abuse? So it's a fascinating case, and it's been looked at in incredible detail by a gentleman named Christopher Josephy, who has written a book called about it, and that's I think Chris's book is coming out in the summer, about June, I think. So that's one well worth to look at. But yes, Price loved the controversy, loved making headlines. I mean, he did go to Germany to try and prove the fallacy of transcendental magic by turning a goat into a handsome young man using a magical formula. He did all sorts of strange things.
He never shied away from things, did he?
Definitely not.
One of his most famous areas, though, is obviously the séance room.
Mm-hmm.
And the séance situation. Now, that's where you've been to a few séances, haven't you?
Yes, I mean, I find that séance room and sort of certainly physical mediumship very, very interesting. I almost sort of liken it to. It's almost like, in a haunted house investigation, everything is very spontaneous, and although you can control a building and control certain things, it is spontaneous. Whereas in the séance room, it's almost like a sort of more like a controlled experiment, if you will, you know. So I always felt that there was more, if it was possible to get good proof and good evidence of psychic happenings, then that would be the place where you would likely to get it. So yes, I sat for about 2.5 years in a small home circle near Leighton Buzzard, in a circle with developing medium, and I also attended other public seances with other physical mediums around the country. Yes, I've seen and heard lots of strange and wonderful things. I mean, not a lot of it I would believe was genuine, but certainly the things that took place in our home circle were very interesting. And then there was again, it was all blackout conditions. Everybody there was sincere. There was no. I wouldn't think that anybody was messing around or fooling. Had nothing to gain from doing that at all. But there were some very interesting physical effects that took place in the room on occasions. We if 4 or 5 people are in a small room closed in for 2.5 hours in the dark, you would expect the temperature to rise and get hot, wouldn't you? Well, this was the complete opposite. On several occasions, the temperature used to plummet, used to drop. It would get very cold. We called it the fridge door effect, where because the medium would be in a the traditional cabinet, like a curtained area on one corner of the room, but there was this feeling of coldness which used to come out and sort of spread around the room, and you could feel it against your skin and your face, and then it would gradually sort of fade away. There were various knocks and raps and noises in the room, tapping noises underneath people's chairs, and a sort of a breeze type effect, as if someone was like blowing on your face or your hands. That used to go on quite often, and obviously we had trance sort of communication as well, through the medium, who was obviously in a trance state and would be sort of overshadowed by various personalities who would come and speak through her. So it was a fascinating experience.
I've never actually done a séance, believe
right.
it or not. I think that might have to be something I try.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a bit of a séance junkie, I think you would call me.
Now, we have a question in the chat room. Does Paul think that the activity is from spirit or perhaps manifestations of the group mind, like the Philip experiment?
That's a very good question. I think that the answer to that is I don't know. I think it's. I'm open to the possibility of spirit, communication and that taking place. Yes, you can't rule out subconscious things, subconscious activity from the medium, and also the as you say, a group mind type thing. I mean, from which was amply demonstrated with the Philip experiment, that took place in Canada in the 70s. So I'm sort of on the fence on that. Really, it's fascinating. Really, I don't really think I had enough evidence in the seances that I took place in to come to a conclusion, because the seances, the development was building up, and then unfortunately, as what happens with a lot of these home circles and seance groups, the group sort of split up. There were personal problems with people that they had outside of the circle, which affected the sort of harmony, if you like, of the within the group, and unfortunately that group disbanded, so we never really progressed to where I think we might have got to, which was a shame.
Yeah, similar to the Skulls experiment, where they sat for years, didn't they? They sat for absolutely huge lengths of time.
Yes, yeah. I mean, Skull was another very famous physical mediumship experiment, and again, and obviously, that obviously broke up at the end, through various reasons. So yes, it's a shame. It's a shame that happened, but I find it fascinating, and I'm always open to taking part in something like that again, because I do find it very, very interesting.
Now, there's one thing that you shared on your Twitter feed that I caught sight of earlier today, and that's literally how people do seances is very, very stagnant almost, because it's very similar to how they used to do it back in Harry Price's day. But there's the psychic news have actually tried to bring it more forward into the modern age, haven't they?
Yes, I mean, Harry Price's day, it was so much physical mediumship activity going on. Today, it has sort of waned, and there are very few. I think there are a lot of groups active, but in private, behind closed doors. There's a lot of distrust between researchers and spiritualist people in the past. Brought about by characters like Harry Price, who did expose a lot of fraud, and so there is a sort of a feeling of distrust on both sides, really. So I think in now today, physical mediums are very much very rare on thin on the ground. And yes, what you're talking about, psychic news, that was that was attempt to address the problem of fakery and fraud in with these things, because it is so very easy to fake effects when you have blackout conditions. Obviously, the blackout is there because people believe that it helps with phenomena, and certainly where mediums said that they needed ectoplasm in order to materialise spirit forms, which was intolerant to light and to bright light. So yes, I mean the Psychic News recently, or last year, began a campaign to introduce infrared photography into seance room demonstrations, to try and root out some fakery, which still goes on today, I'm afraid. This is the thing going right back to the 1950s, that the researchers were saying that we have the technology now that can prove one way or another whether things are being faked. But it's not been sort of taken up. So, I think physical mediumship and materialisation phenomena is as controversial today as it was, back in the heyday, the golden era of physical mediumship, which was in the 20s and 30s, when people like Price were active.
Yeah, very much so. And you say that not many people have taken up on that challenge.
Yes, I don't know how it's gone, whether how well received it has been. I think, certainly, I think if people have not got anything to hide, then there's and there isn't. I mean, there was a lot of talk that the infrared was harmful to mediums and their sort of phenomena in the seance room, that it was possible to harm people. But a lot of the technology today doesn't require infrared. You can still some of these night vision cameras they work on body heat rather than actually producing infrared rays. So I don't think there's any health issues at all.
No. Yeah, it's incredibly interesting, I have to say. If somebody was to do the experiment and then it got proved or disproved, you know what I mean? I just think that would be incredibly interesting.
There was a chap caught last year getting up and walking around and touching people and doing all the making all the effects.
Yeah.
So that was and he was caught out because somebody put a camera in there and caught him literally red-handed. So it does happen, and it's a shame, because I do believe that under certain circumstances, this type of phenomena is real, and it does happen. I mean, Price proved it with Rudy Schneider back in the 1931 when he did his experiments with him. I mean, even Price, as critical a researcher as he was, felt that Rudy was a genuine medium, that he did produce genuine phenomena, and he championed him up until the day that Price died. The very last letter that Price wrote before he had a heart attack and died suddenly was to a colleague, and mentioning Rudy Schneider and how genuine his phenomena was. So if a skeptic such as Harry Price can believe it, then I'm quite happy to believe it as well.
Yeah, I have to say, kind of agree. Now, one thing, because we've only got 5 minutes left of the show, would you believe? It's gone so quick, as always. Now, your current project at the moment is you're actually writing a biography of Peter Underwood himself, aren't you?
That's right, yes. I mean, Peter sadly passed away in November 2014, and I was bequeathed a lot of his material, a lot of his papers, and from his incredible 60 years of involvement in psychical research. So I'm gradually working my way through that and cataloguing it, and yes, and that's probably would be my next project, would be to write a biography of Peter and his life and times and his role within the the paranormal community of the post-war period. I mean, Peter wrote his own autobiography in the early 80s, but that only really, I think, touched the surface. So there's a lot of interest, lots of politics, lots of intrigue, and interesting ghostly places that Peter went to. So it's a fascinating. It's fascinating to look back and research it. The Peter biography is my next my
You've tackled two of the main well-known characters in the paranormal field. Oh my goodness, do you know what I mean? You know so much about Harry and now Peter Underwood, and you've been privy to some really rare and important documentation. It must make you feel so special.
I don't know about special. I mean, it's I'm pleased that this sort of stuff is still around, that it's not been thrown out or destroyed, and that it can still tell us things, It just shows you how an important role that Peter Underwood played in not only educating people like myself, but like people of my age sort of grew up reading his books, in the 70s and 80s. At that time, Peter was the go-to man. He was very much the Harry Price of his day, in that he was the person that people went to if they needed a comment or an opinion on paranormal things. So it's great that this stuff is still around and that it can be preserved, So it's fascinating to research his life and set down, the history of those times. They were very rich times for paranormal inquiry. The 60s and 70s, very interesting.
Oh, incredible, absolutely incredible. Now, before we go, very quickly, you actually have your own publishers, don't you? It's the Limbury Press.
Oh yes, it's a little bit of a side project, really. As and when. I've published a couple of books. One by Darren Ritson on the called Contagion, which was about the South Shields poltergeist, and a book by Tony Browell, who was a Luton ghost hunter here in Luton. A book of his memoirs and his sort of work on ghosts of beds and hearts. So yes, it's a little side project as and when I can get the time and the finances to do it.
And I have shared Paul's website in the chat room as well, which lists all the books that he's written. Now, amongst them, you've got Haunted St Albans, you've got Extreme Hauntings, Ghosts and Gallows, Haunted Luton and Dunstable, Shadows in the Nave, The Haunted Counties. You do love a county, don't you? The Little Book of Ghosts. Yeah. Written in Blood, which is all about vampires, because you know the Highgate vampire hunter, don't you?
Oh, you mean David Farron? Yes,
David Farron,
I know David
yes,
very
I
well.
do.
You won't like
lovely.
you calling him Farron.
Oh, no, I know. But he's lovely. I've spoken to him and he is absolutely lovely. Haunted Stevenage, obviously, and then The Enigma of Rosalie, which are all listed on your website, which is www.pauladamsauthor.co.uk. Now, if you want to follow Paul, you can also follow him on his Twitter, which is @pauladamsauthor. And is there anywhere else they can find you?
I think that's about it, really. That's enough, I think.
Is
You don't want too much of me.
Oh, thank you so much for talking to me tonight. I'm so sorry we've run out of time. We could talk on and on, couldn't we?
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me in the chat room. Don't forget, you can also find all of our episodes on Podbean. You can find us on Mixcloud, SoundCloud. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on, so many places. Tumblr, I think I've mentioned that. Anyway, you can find us just about everywhere. So check out all of our past episodes. And if you've missed anything at all, or you want to hear about anything at all, let us know. And here at Parasearch, we will see and do what we can. Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back tomorrow. We have the Great Paranormal Debate kicking off at 8 p.m, and we have the Dark Mirror Show kicking off at 9. And on that note, I bid you all a very good night.
You're listening to Parasearch UK Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio.